The cold air bit at my cheeks as I glided across the rink, my skates slicing smoothly through the ice. The bright lights overhead reflected off the frosty surface, and laughter echoed around me, mingling with the sound of blades carving arcs into the ice. It was supposed to be a night of fun and freedom, a rare break from the monotony of everyday life. My husband Derek had insisted he didn't like skating and had chosen to stay home. His exact words still rang in my ears. "You know I'm terrible at it. I'll just slow you down. Go have fun with your friends." So here I was, bundled in my warmest coat, laughing with my best friend, Rachel, as we navigated the crowded rink. I should have been enjoying myself, but something felt off. Maybe it was Derek's unusually abrupt tone earlier. Or maybe it was just my imagination. I shook it off, forcing a smile and focusing on the rhythm of my skates. Halfway through the evening, Rachel stopped mid-glide and pulled out her phone, her eyes widening. "You're not going to believe this," she said, her voice a mix of shock and uncertainty. "What?" I asked, slowing down beside her. Wordlessly, she held up her phone, and the video began to play. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then it hit me like a punch to the stomach. Derek. My Derek. The man who had insisted he hated skating, who had claimed he'd rather spend the evening alone at home, was right there on the screen. He wasn't just skating. He was holding hands with a woman I didn't recognize, laughing as she guided him around the rink. The ice beneath my feet seemed to crack. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the sounds around me. I stared at the screen, disbelief and fury coursing through me. Where did you get this?" I finally managed to choke out. Rachel hesitated. "It's all over Instagram. A friend of mine posted it just now. I thought you should know." I felt the world tilt, and for a moment I thought I might actually fall. My hands clenched into fists as I tried to steady my breathing. Without another word, I stepped off the ice and hurried to the benches, my legs shaking more from anger than exhaustion. The drive home was a blur. I don't even remember saying goodbye to Rachel or taking off my skates. All I could think about was that video, his carefree laugh, the way he held that woman's hand so naturally, like it was the most familiar thing in the world. Who was she? How long had this been going on? Questions buzzed in my mind like angry bees, each one stinging sharper than the last. When I walked into the house, Derek was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He looked up and smiled, as if everything was perfectly normal. "Hey, how was the rink?" he asked, his tone casual. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out my phone, opened the video and thrust it toward him. His smile faltered, and his face drained of color. "What is this, Derek?" My voice trembled, a mixture of hurt and fury. "You said you hated skating. You said you were staying home. So what the hell is this?" He stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. For a moment he said nothing, and I could see the wheels turning in his head as he tried to come up with an explanation. Finally, he exhaled and looked at me, his expression a mask of forced calm. "I can explain," he said, his voice low. I crossed my arms, waiting. "Go ahead. Explain." I decided to give skating another try," he began, his words slow and deliberate. "You're always saying I should try new things. So I thought, why not? And that's Chloe. She's a skating instructor. She was just helping me learn." I stared at him, incredulous. "You expect me to believe that? That you randomly decided to go skating tonight, and this Chloe just happened to be there to teach you?" "Yes," he insisted, his eyes pleading. "That's exactly what happened. I didn't tell you because I wanted it to be a surprise. I thought maybe I could get good enough to skate with you someday." His words sounded rehearsed, like a script he'd hastily written in his mind. But there was no sincerity in his eyes, no remorse. Just desperation. "Do you think I'm stupid, Derek?" My voice cracked, tears stinging my eyes. "Do you really think I'm going to believe this garbage? You lied to me. You said you were staying home. And now I see you out there with her, holding her hand like you've known her forever." "It's not like that," he snapped, his voice rising. "You're overreacting. Nothing happened." "Nothing happened?" I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. "You lied to me. You went behind my back. That's not nothing, Derek. That's betrayal." He stood up, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't think it was a big deal. I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow in my own ears. Not a big deal? Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to find out like this? From a video that's all over social media? God, Derek, do you even care about me at all? Of course I care about you, he shot back, his voice breaking. I love you. This was stupid, okay? I messed up. But it wasn't what you think. I shook my head, my tears spilling over. I don't even know what to think anymore. All I know is that you lied. And now I don't know if I can trust you. The silence that followed was deafening. He reached for me, but I stepped back, the space between us suddenly feeling like a chasm. I need time, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I need to figure out if I can believe anything you say. He didn't argue. He just nodded, his shoulders slumping as he watched me walk away. That night I lay awake, replaying the video in my mind, questioning everything I thought I knew about our relationship. Trust, once broken, is a fragile thing. And as much as I wanted to believe his words, the image of him on that rink with her was seared into my memory. A reminder that sometimes love isn't enough to keep the cracks from spreading. The days that followed were a haze of uncertainty and pain. Derek tried to act as though everything was normal, making coffee in the morning, asking about my day, and even offering to cook dinner. A rare gesture that felt more like a calculated move than genuine affection. But I couldn't look at him the same way. Every glance in his direction was met with a flood of doubt and unanswered questions. Who was Chloe really? Was she just a skating instructor? Or was there something more? The video played on an endless loop in my mind, taunting me with the carefree way he laughed, the intimate way their hands intertwined. I buried myself in work, staying late at the office to avoid going home. My coworkers didn't seem to notice anything was wrong, and I was grateful for the temporary escape. But when the clock struck 6, and the office emptied out, I was left with the suffocating reality of my situation. The loneliness settled in like a weight on my chest. I missed the way things used to be before the trust shattered, before the icy distance grew between us. One evening Rachel called me. Her voice was hesitant, as though she didn't want to pry but couldn't hold back. "Have you talked to him?" she asked. I sighed, staring at the ceiling of my car as I sat parked in the driveway. Talked? If you mean exchanging words, then yes. But actually talking? No. I don't even know where to start, Ratch. Every time I look at him, all I see is that video. All I feel is this ache in my chest. I get it, she said softly. But you can't live like this forever. Either you confront him and demand the truth, or you decide it's not worth it. You deserve answers, Sarah. Her words lingered long after I hung up. She was right. As much as I wanted to avoid the confrontation, I couldn't let this fester. That night I walked into the living room where Derek sat, scrolling on his phone. "We need to talk," I said, crossing my arms. He looked up, his face tightening as though he'd been expecting this. "Okay," he said, setting his phone down. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Who is Chloe? And don't give me the skating instructor excuse. I want the truth." His eyes flickered with something, guilt? Panic? It was hard to tell. He rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit I'd come to recognize over the years. "She's a friend. We met at work a few months ago. She offered to teach me how to skate, and I thought it'd be a good idea." "A good idea?" I repeated, my voice rising. "To lie to me? To sneak around behind my back? How is that a good idea, Derek?" "I didn't mean for it to seem like that," he said quickly. "I didn't think you'd understand." "Understand what?" "That you'd rather spend time with her than be honest with your wife." My voice cracked and I hated how vulnerable I sounded. His face softened and he reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "It wasn't like that, Sarah. I swear. I felt like we've been drifting apart lately, and I didn't know how to fix it. Chloe, she was just a distraction, someone to talk to. But it wasn't anything serious." I stared at him, my heart pounding. "Do you hear yourself? You're admitting to emotional cheating and expecting me to just accept it." "It wasn't cheating," he argued, his voice growing defensive. "I never touched her. I never did anything to betray you physically. That doesn't make it any better." I snapped, tears streaming down my face. "You still lied. You still chose her over me." He fell silent, his eyes dropping to the floor. The weight of his guilt hung heavy in the air. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I messed up. I know I did. But I love you, Sarah. I want to fix this. I just don't know how." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that love was enough to repair the cracks in our marriage. But trust isn't something that can be rebuilt overnight. It takes time, effort, and honesty, things Derek hadn't shown me in a long time. "I need space," I said, my voice trembling. "I can't keep living like this, questioning everything you say, wondering if you're telling me the truth. I need to figure out if I can forgive you." His face fell, but he nodded. "I'll give you space," he said quietly. "But please, Sarah, don't give up on us." I didn't respond. Instead, I turned and walked upstairs, the weight of his words pressing down on me. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if our marriage could survive this. Trust, once broken, is a fragile thing. And while part of me wanted to believe Derek could change, another part of me wasn't sure if I could ever look at him the same way again. The days turned into weeks, and we lived like strangers sharing the same house. He tried to reach out, leaving notes on the counter, cooking dinner, and even buying me flowers. Gestures that once would have melted my heart. But now they felt hollow, like he was trying to patch a sinking ship with duct tape. I started seeing a therapist, someone to help me sort through the mess of emotions swirling inside me. She asked questions I didn't want to answer, forcing me to confront the reality of my pain and doubt. "Do you still love him?" she asked one day. The question caught me off guard. Did I? Love isn't something that disappears overnight, but it also isn't immune to betrayal. I thought about the man I fell in love with, the man who used to make me laugh until I cried, who held me close on stormy nights and promised to always be honest with me. That man felt like a stranger now, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. One evening, as I sat on the porch staring out at the setting sun, Derek joined me. He didn't say anything at first, just sat beside me, the silence stretching between us like a canyon. Finally he spoke. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, his voice steady but soft. "About us. About what I did. And I realize now how much I hurt you. I was selfish. I let my insecurities get in the way of our marriage. And I'm so sorry." His words were raw, unpolished, and for the first time in weeks they felt genuine. I turned to look at him, searching his face for any sign of deception, but all I saw was regret. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know," he said, nodding. "And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn back your trust if you'll let me." For the first time I felt a flicker of hope. It was small, fragile, but it was there. Maybe we could rebuild. Maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. The road ahead was long, and the scars of betrayal would always linger. Still, as I sat there beside him, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized that sometimes the only way forward is to take the first step, no matter how uncertain it might feel. The flicker of hope that had surfaced that evening stayed with me, faint but persistent. I wasn't ready to forgive Derek yet, and I certainly wasn't ready to forget, but I also couldn't deny that his vulnerability had stirred something inside me, a faint echo of the connection we once shared. I resolved to take things one day at a time, to see if his actions would match his words. Trust wouldn't be rebuilt through promises alone. It would take effort, consistency, and above all, honesty. The first test came a few days later. Derek approached me after dinner, his hands tucked nervously into his pockets. "I was thinking," he said, his voice tentative, "maybe we could spend some time together this weekend. Go for a hike or grab dinner. Just something to reconnect." The idea filled me with equal parts trepidation and curiosity. Part of me wanted to keep my distance to avoid the risk of being hurt again. But another part of me, the part that still held onto a shred of hope, knew that if we were going to move forward, we needed to start somewhere. "Okay," I said finally. "But no expectations, Derek. I'm not promising anything." He nodded quickly, relief washing over his face. "Of course. No pressure. Just time together." That Saturday we drove out to a nearby nature trail, the air crisp and cool with the promise of autumn. The silence between us was awkward at first, filled with the unspoken weight of everything that had happened. But as we walked, the conversation began to flow, stilted and cautious at first, then gradually more natural. We talked about work, about the changing seasons, about memories from earlier, happier times in our marriage. For a few hours it felt almost like old times, as if the cracks in our relationship could be smoothed over with shared laughter and familiar banter. But as the day wore on, reality crept back in. The pain of his betrayal still lingered, a shadow that refused to be ignored. When we reached a quiet clearing overlooking the valley below, I turned to him, unable to hold back the questions that had been gnawing at me. Why, Derek? Why didn't you just talk to me? If you were feeling disconnected, if you thought we were drifting apart, why didn't you come to me instead of her? He looked down at his hands, his expression heavy with regret. I wish I had, he said quietly. I don't have a good excuse, Sarah. I guess I was scared. Scared that you'd see me as weak, or that you'd brush it off, or worse, that you'd agree we were falling apart. I swallowed hard, his words hitting me like a punch to the gut. So instead you chose to lie. You chose to hurt me. I know, he said, his voice breaking. And I hate myself for it. Every day I think about how much I've hurt you, how much I've damaged what we had. If I could take it all back, I would. His remorse was palpable, but it wasn't enough to erase the pain. You can't take it back, Derek, I said, my voice trembling. All you can do is prove to me that you're worth trusting again. I will, he said firmly, his eyes meeting mine. I know I don't deserve it right now, but I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust back. The sincerity in his voice gave me pause. I didn't know if I believed him yet, but I could see that he was trying. And maybe, just maybe, that was a start. In the weeks that followed, Derek kept his word. He made an effort to be open with me, to communicate in ways he hadn't before. He started sharing more about his day, asking about mine, and even suggesting activities for us to do together. Slowly, the walls between us began to lower brick by brick. It wasn't a seamless process. There were moments when old wounds reopened, when a careless word or a fleeting memory of that video would send me spiraling back into doubt. But Derek didn't shy away from those moments. He faced them head-on, acknowledging my pain and offering reassurance without defensiveness. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, he turned to me unexpectedly. I've been thinking, he said, his voice serious. Maybe we should try counseling. Together, I mean. I blinked, surprised. You'd be willing to do that? Of course, he said without hesitation. I'll do anything, Sarah. I want us to get through this, and I know I can't do it alone. His willingness to seek help was another step forward. Another sign that he was truly committed to making things right. We started attending sessions with a couples therapist, and while the process was uncomfortable at times, it was also illuminating. The therapist helped us uncover underlying issues that had contributed to our disconnect. Unspoken frustrations, unmet needs, and lingering insecurities that neither of us had fully acknowledged. Through those sessions, I began to see Derek in a new light. He wasn't just the man who had hurt me. He was also the man who was trying every day to make amends. And as much as I hated to admit it, I wasn't blameless either. I had contributed to the distance between us, even if unintentionally. Recognizing that didn't absolve him of his actions, but it did give me a new perspective. Months passed, and while the scars of his betrayal didn't disappear, they began to fade. Trust was still a fragile thing, but it was growing stronger with each passing day. Derek's actions spoke louder than his words. He showed up, consistently and wholeheartedly, proving that he was willing to fight for our marriage. One evening, as we sat together on the back porch watching the stars, he reached for my hand. I know I've said this 100 times, he said softly, but I need you to know how much I love you. I don't take you for granted anymore, Sarah. I never will again. Tears filled my eyes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself believe him. I love you too, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. But we're not the same people we were before, Derek. This isn't about going back to the way things were. It's about building something new, something stronger. He nodded, squeezing my hand. We will, he said with quiet determination. Together. And for the first time I felt a glimmer of hope that wasn't just a flicker. It was a steady, growing light. Our journey was far from over, but we were finally moving forward, step by step, toward a future that felt worth fighting for. As the weeks turned into months, Derek and I found ourselves redefining what our relationship meant. It wasn't about recapturing what we'd lost. Those moments were gone, and clinging to them would only keep us tethered to the pain. Instead, we began focusing on what we could build moving forward. It wasn't easy. Trust, once broken, didn't simply heal with time. It required effort, consistency, and patience from both of us. Derek continued to surprise me with his determination. He didn't just apologize anymore, he acted. Little things like being present during conversations, looking me in the eye when we talked, or even putting his phone away when we were together, started to rebuild the foundation of what had been shattered. At first, I was wary of these gestures, wondering if they were calculated moves to placate me. But over time I realized they weren't forced. They were genuine. He wanted to change not because I demanded it, but because he truly understood the depth of his mistake and what it would take to repair the damage. Counseling became a regular part of our routine. We met with the therapist weekly, sometimes tackling small issues, sometimes delving into deeper, more painful truths. I had to confront my own vulnerabilities too. The moments I had shut Derek out emotionally, the times I had ignored signs that something was wrong in our marriage. Those realizations were hard to swallow. It was easier to see myself as the victim, to place all the blame on him and absolve myself of any responsibility. But healing didn't work that way. It demanded honesty even when it hurt. One session in particular stayed with me. The therapist asked us to name 3 things we missed about each other, things we felt had gotten lost along the way. At first I hesitated, unsure if I could even answer. But as I looked at Derek, I saw not just the man who had hurt me, but also the man I had loved deeply for years. "I miss how you used to make me feel safe," I said finally, my voice trembling. "Like I could tell you anything and you'd never judge me. I miss the way you used to look at me like I was the most important person in the world. And I miss how we used to laugh together. Really laugh like nothing else mattered." Derek's eyes glistened as he listened, his expression filled with regret and tenderness. When it was his turn, his voice was thick with emotion. "I miss the way you used to trust me," he said. "I miss how you'd light up when you talked about your dreams, and how you used to share every part of your world with me. And I miss being the man you could count on." The room was silent for a long moment, the weight of our words hanging between us. It was painful, but it was also cathartic. For the first time in a long time, we weren't just talking, we were connecting. Outside of therapy, we started finding ways to reconnect in everyday life. Derek suggested a weekly date night, something we hadn't done since the early years of our marriage. At first, the idea felt strange, almost forced. But as the weeks went on, it became something I looked forward to. A chance to step away from the weight of our struggles and simply enjoy each other's company. We went to the movies, tried new restaurants, and even took a pottery class together, laughing at our lopsided creations. Those moments reminded me of why I had fallen in love with him in the first place. Still, there were setbacks. There were nights when I couldn't stop thinking about that video. When the image of Derek holding Chloe's hand would flash in my mind, unbidden and relentless. On those nights, the anger and hurt would resurface, threatening to undo all the progress we'd made. But Derek didn't retreat or grow defensive. Instead, he faced my pain head-on, listening without interruption, offering reassurance without excuses. His patience was something new, something I hadn't seen in him before. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, I asked him a question that had been haunting me since the beginning. "Why her?" My voice was quiet but steady. "Of all people, why Chloe?" He hesitated, his gaze dropping to his hands. "I don't think it was about her," he said after a long pause. "It was about me. I felt like I was failing, like I wasn't enough for you anymore. And instead of dealing with that, I looked for validation somewhere else. It wasn't fair to you, and it wasn't fair to her either. I was a coward." His honesty caught me off guard. For so long, I had wanted to believe that Chloe was the problem, that if she hadn't been in the picture, none of this would have happened. But hearing him admit that it was his own insecurity, his own weakness, made me realize that the issue ran deeper than I had imagined. It wasn't about her. It was about us. About him. About the fractures in our relationship that neither of us had been willing to confront until it was almost too late. As the months continued, the cracks in our marriage began to mend, slowly but surely. We started to rebuild trust, not through grand gestures, but through the small, consistent actions that spoke louder than words. Derek showed up for me day after day, proving that he was willing to put in the work. And I, in turn, began to let my guard down bit by bit, allowing myself to believe in the possibility of a future together. One evening, as we sat by the fire, Derek took my hand in his. "I know I don't deserve it," he said softly, "but thank you. Thank you for giving me a second chance." I looked at him, seeing not just the man who had hurt me, but the man who had fought to make things right. "You earned it," I said, my voice steady. "And I'm glad I gave it to you." Our journey was far from over. There would always be moments of doubt, moments when the scars of the past threatened to resurface. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: hope. Hope that we could not only survive this but come out stronger on the other side. Hope that love, even when tested, could endure. And hope that, together, we could create a new beginning. As time passed, the wounds of betrayal began to close, leaving behind scars that I knew would never fully fade. They weren't reminders of pain, though, not anymore. They became marks of survival, symbols of the work we'd both put into salvaging something that had once seemed unsalvageable. Trust, though fragile, was growing stronger every day, built on the foundation of honesty and effort that Derek consistently showed. Our date nights became a cherished ritual, something we both looked forward to in the midst of busy schedules and lingering doubts. We explored new parts of the city together, tried cooking recipes that inevitably ended in laughter, and even revisited the skating rink, the place where everything had unraveled. Derek had suggested it one evening, his voice hesitant but resolute. "I want to go back there," he said, sitting across from me at the dinner table. "Not to erase what happened, but to create a new memory. One that's just ours." The idea filled me with trepidation, but also with a strange sense of anticipation. Returning to that rink felt like confronting a ghost, one that had haunted me for months. But as we laced up our skates and stepped onto the ice, I realized how far we had come. Derek was unsteady, gripping my hand for balance, and for the first time in a long time I laughed, not out of bitterness or pain but out of genuine joy. The memory we created that night was nothing like the one that had haunted me. It was something entirely new, a moment that belonged only to us. Life didn't return to normal, it evolved into something different, something more intentional. Derek and I learned to communicate in ways we never had before. Instead of letting small frustrations fester, we addressed them head-on. Instead of assuming we knew what the other was thinking, we asked questions and listened to the answers. There were still moments of doubt, moments when I caught myself questioning his sincerity or replaying old memories in my mind. But those moments grew fewer and farther between, replaced by a cautious but growing confidence in the strength of our bond. One of the biggest turning points came during a weekend getaway to a cabin in the mountains. It had been Derek's idea. A chance to escape the noise of everyday life and focus entirely on each other. The cabin was cozy, with a crackling fireplace and a view of snow-covered peaks that seemed to stretch on forever. We spent the days hiking through the woods and the evenings wrapped in blankets, talking late into the night. On the second evening, as the firelight flickered across the room, Derek pulled out a small box from his pocket. My heart raced as he opened it to reveal a delicate bracelet, its simple design catching the light. "This isn't an apology," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's not something I'm giving you to make up for what I did, because I know that's not how it works. This is a promise that I will never take you for granted again. A promise that I will always choose honesty, even when it's hard. And a promise that I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm worthy of your trust." Tears filled my eyes as I looked at the bracelet, not because of its beauty, but because of the meaning behind it. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was a quiet, profound statement of commitment. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Not just for this, but for everything you've done to make things right." He fastened the bracelet around my wrist, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. A calm certainty that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, we were in this together. When we returned home, life didn't suddenly become perfect. There were still arguments, misunderstandings, and moments of insecurity. But the difference was that we faced those moments together, with a newfound resilience that had been forged in the fires of our struggles. Derek continued to show up, not just for me, but for our marriage, proving time and again that he was willing to do the work. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, I found myself reflecting on everything we had been through. The pain, the doubt, the anger. It had all felt insurmountable at the time, like a storm that would never pass. But now as I looked at Derek, I realized how far we had come. The man sitting beside me wasn't the same person who had broken my trust. He was someone stronger, someone more self-aware, someone who had fought for our relationship with a determination that had rekindled my faith in him. "Do you ever think about it?" I asked softly, breaking the comfortable silence. He turned to me, his expression serious. "I do," he admitted. "Not because I want to, but because I need to. I need to remember what I did, so I never make the same mistake again." His honesty took me by surprise, but it also reassured me. "I think about it too," I said. "But it doesn't hurt as much anymore. It feels distant, like it's part of a story that's no longer ours." He reached for my hand, his touch warm and steady. "That's because we wrote a new chapter, Sarah. And it's one I'm proud of." As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, I felt a sense of contentment that I hadn't experienced in a long time. Our journey hadn't been easy, and it was far from over. But for the first time I felt certain that we were on the right path. Together we had faced the storm and emerged stronger, not because we had erased the past, but because we had learned from it. And as we sat there, hand in hand, I realized that love isn't about never making mistakes. It's about choosing to fight for each other, even when it would be easier to walk away. As time continued to move forward, our lives settled into a new rhythm. It wasn't the kind of effortless love that movies and novels romanticize, but it was something deeper, more resilient. It was the kind of love that had been tested by fire and forged into something unshakable, something that understood the value of effort and the necessity of forgiveness. The scars left by Derek's betrayal were still there, faint reminders of what we had overcome, but they no longer dominated my thoughts. Instead, they served as quiet affirmations of how far we had come. Derek had become someone I could rely on again. He didn't just say the right things. He followed through with actions that spoke louder than words. He was attentive in ways I hadn't even realized I needed, remembering the little things like my favorite tea when I was feeling under the weather or the way I liked my coffee in the morning. But more importantly, he listened. Really listened. It was as if he had finally understood that being present wasn't just about being in the same room. It was about being fully engaged, fully there. One day, while I was cleaning out the attic, I stumbled upon an old box of letters and keepsakes from the early days of our relationship. Inside were photographs of us from college, notes we had written to each other during late-night study sessions, and even a ticket stub from our first concert together. The memories came flooding back, bittersweet and warm all at once. I sat down on the dusty floor and leafed through the contents, my heart aching with a mix of nostalgia and longing for the simplicity of those early years. Derek found me there a few minutes later. "What are you doing up here?" he asked, his voice soft as he climbed the ladder and saw the box in front of me. I held up a picture of us from our first vacation, a grainy snapshot of us smiling on a windy beach, his arm around my shoulders. "Just remembering," I said. "We were so young. So hopeful." He sat down beside me, his eyes scanning the photo. "We still are," he said after a moment. "Maybe not young, but hopeful. At least I hope we are." I looked at him, studying his face. There were new lines there, signs of the stress and growth we'd both endured over the past year. But his eyes held the same warmth that had drawn me to him all those years ago. "I think we are," I said quietly. "Hopeful, I mean." He smiled, and for the first time in a long time it felt unburdened. "Then maybe we should add to this box," he said, gesturing to the keepsakes. "New memories, new photos. A new chapter." The idea brought a lump to my throat. It felt like a small but significant step forward, a tangible way to mark our progress. "I'd like that," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. From that day on, we started making an effort to create new memories together. They weren't always grand or extravagant. Sometimes it was as simple as a walk in the park or cooking dinner together. But each moment felt meaningful in its own way. We began documenting these moments, filling the box with photos and notes that captured the small joys and triumphs of our journey. As the seasons changed, so did we. The pain that had once defined our lives began to give way to something gentler, something more enduring. Derek and I started planning for the future again. Not with the blind optimism of our younger years, but with a quiet determination to build a life that honored the lessons we had learned. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the first snowfall of the season, Derek turned to me with an expression I hadn't seen in a long time. It was a mixture of hope and vulnerability, the kind of look that spoke volumes without a single word. "Sarah," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I know I've said this before, but I need you to hear it again. Thank you. For staying. For believing in us, even when I gave you every reason not to." I reached for his hand, my fingers curling around his. "I didn't stay for you," I said honestly. "I stayed for us. For the life we had built, and for the hope that we could build something even better. And I'm glad I did." He squeezed my hand, his gaze holding mine. "So am I," he said softly. In that moment I realized something profound. Love isn't about perfection. It's not about never making mistakes or always getting it right. It's about showing up day after day, even when it's hard. It's about choosing each other, over and over again, despite the flaws and the messiness of life. And while our journey had been anything but smooth, it had brought us to a place of understanding and resilience that I never could have imagined. As the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in quiet beauty, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. Derek and I weren't the same people we had been before, and our relationship wasn't the same either. But maybe that was a good thing. Maybe the cracks and scars were what made it stronger, more real. And as we sat there, watching the snow transform the world into something new, I realized that our story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The snow outside grew heavier, turning the porch into a quiet sanctuary of white. Derek and I stayed there for a while longer, bundled in blankets, the cold barely touching us as we sat close together. The silence between us was no longer awkward or tense. It felt like an unspoken understanding, a shared acknowledgement of how far we had come and how much further we still had to go. For the first time in a long time, I felt the walls I had built around my heart beginning to soften, to crumble just a little. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee wafting from the kitchen. It was a small thing, but the consistency of Derek's effort never failed to catch me off guard. He had made a habit of waking up early and brewing a pot for us, a quiet ritual that seemed to say more than any grand gesture could. I found him standing by the window, staring out at the snow-covered yard with a faint smile on his face. "Morning," I said softly, pulling my cardigan tighter around me. He turned, his smile widening as he handed me a mug. "Morning. I was just thinking about how peaceful it looks out there. Almost like a blank slate." I sipped the coffee, the warmth spreading through me. "A blank slate," I repeated, letting the words settle in my mind. "That sounds nice." "It does," he said, his voice steady. "But I also think about how much work goes into keeping it that way. Clearing the snow, taking care of the house, making sure nothing gets buried for too long." I raised an eyebrow at him, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Are we still talking about the yard?" He chuckled, the sound light and easy. "Maybe not. I guess I'm just realizing that it's not enough to hope for things to stay peaceful. You have to keep putting in the effort, every single day." His words struck a chord in me. It was true. The peace we had begun to find didn't happen on its own. It came from the choices we made, from the willingness to face the hard truths and the quiet work of rebuilding what had been broken. I looked at Derek, really looked at him, and for the first time in months, I saw the man I had fallen in love with, not the man who had betrayed me, but the one who had fought to make things right. As the day unfolded, we fell into an easy rhythm. We shoveled the driveway together, laughing as Derek tried to throw snowballs when he thought I wasn't looking. Later, we cooked lunch side by side. A simple meal that somehow felt like a feast because of the shared effort that went into it. These moments, small and seemingly insignificant, began to weave themselves into the fabric of our lives, creating a new kind of normal. But it wasn't always smooth. There were still times when doubt crept in, when I found myself questioning whether the changes I saw in Derek were permanent or just a fleeting attempt to make amends. One evening, after a long day at work, I found myself replaying that old video in my mind, the image of him skating with Chloe as vivid as it had been the first time I saw it. The hurt came rushing back, sharp and unforgiving, and I couldn't stop the tears that welled in my eyes. Derek noticed immediately. He set down the book he was reading and came to sit beside me. "Hey," he said gently, his brow furrowing in concern. What's wrong? I hesitated, embarrassed by how easily the pain could resurface. It's nothing, I said, wiping at my cheeks. Just old thoughts I can't seem to shake. He didn't push me to explain further. Instead, he wrapped an arm around my shoulders, pulling me close. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for all of it. I know I can't erase what I did, but I want you to know that I think about it too. Not to dwell on it, but to remind myself of what I almost lost. And I promise you, Sarah, I'll never take us for granted again. His words, spoken with such sincerity, were like a balm to the lingering ache in my heart. I leaned into him, letting the weight of his presence steady me. I know you won't, I whispered. And I'm trying to let go of it, Derek. I really am. It's just hard sometimes. I know, he said, his voice filled with understanding. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. Those moments of vulnerability, when we allowed ourselves to confront the pain instead of burying it, became some of the most healing parts of our journey. They reminded me that forgiveness wasn't about pretending the hurt didn't exist. It was about choosing to move forward despite it. Months turned into seasons, and with each passing day, the wounds of the past faded further into the background. Derek and I began to dream again, to talk about the future with a sense of possibility that had once felt out of reach. We started planning a vacation, something we hadn't done in years. It wasn't about escaping our problems. It was about celebrating the progress we had made, and the life we were rebuilding together. One evening, as we sat at the kitchen table going over travel brochures, Derek reached across the table and took my hand. Do you ever think about how far we've come? He asked, his voice soft but steady. All the time, I admitted, my thumb brushing over his knuckles. Sometimes it feels like a miracle. Other times it feels like the result of a lot of hard work. Maybe it's both, he said with a small smile. Either way, I'm grateful. For you. For us. I smiled back, my heart full in a way I hadn't thought possible. Me too, I said. For all of it. As the night wore on, we continued planning, laughing and dreaming together in a way that felt natural and unforced. It was a reminder that love isn't about avoiding challenges or never making mistakes. It's about choosing to stay, to fight, and to grow together, even when the road is rough. And as we sat there, surrounded by the remnants of dinner and stacks of travel brochures, I realized that our story wasn't just about surviving the storm. It was about thriving after it, about finding beauty in the struggle and strength in each other. And for the first time, I truly believed that we were stronger, not in spite of what we had been through, but because of it. As the months turned into a full year since that night on the skating rink, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed. There was a time when I thought our marriage couldn't survive the betrayal, that the hurt and anger would always hang between us like an invisible wall. But now, as I stood in the kitchen preparing dinner while Derek set the table, it struck me how natural everything felt again. It wasn't that the scars had disappeared. They were still there, faint reminders of what we'd been through. But they no longer defined us. Instead, they were part of the story that had shaped us into the couple we had become. Derek had kept his promises. Every single one. He hadn't just worked to rebuild my trust. He'd gone out of his way to show me, over and over again, that he was a different man now. More present. More honest. More thoughtful in ways I hadn't even realized I'd been missing. It wasn't the big gestures that made the difference. It was the small, consistent actions. The way he'd text me during the day just to say he was thinking of me. The way he'd sit and listen when I needed to vent about work without trying to fix things. The way he remembered little details like how I liked my tea before bed or the songs I hummed when I thought no one was listening. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, he brought up something I hadn't expected. I was thinking, he began, his voice cautious, about Chloe. My heart skipped a beat at the name, but I forced myself to stay calm. What about her? I asked, my voice steady. I want to tell you everything, he said, meeting my gaze. Not because I think it'll change what happened, but because I don't want there to be any secrets between us. I want you to feel like you know everything so there's no room for doubt. I didn't respond right away. The thought of revisiting that chapter of our lives made my stomach twist, but at the same time, I appreciated his willingness to be transparent. Okay, I said finally. I'm listening. He took a deep breath as if gathering his thoughts. When I met Chloe, it wasn't anything intentional. She worked in a different department and we only crossed paths occasionally. At first it was just casual conversations, work stuff, nothing personal. But over time I started opening up to her about things I should have been talking to you about. I didn't even realize what I was doing at first. It was just easy. She didn't know our history, didn't have any expectations. It felt like a break from the pressure I thought I was under. His words were painful to hear, but I stayed silent, letting him continue. When she suggested skating that night, I wasn't thinking about you or how it would look. I was just selfish. I wanted to feel like I wasn't failing at something. But when I saw that video, when I realized how it must have looked to you, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I knew I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. He paused, his hands clenched together. Nothing physical ever happened between us, Sarah. I swear on everything. But I know that doesn't matter. What I did was still a betrayal, and I'll never forgive myself for the way I hurt you. The sincerity in his voice, the raw emotion in his eyes, made it impossible for me to doubt him. It wasn't the first time he told me he regretted his actions, but this time felt different. It was as though he was laying himself bare, holding nothing back. Thank you for telling me, I said quietly. I know that wasn't easy. It wasn't, he admitted. But you deserve the truth. Always. That conversation, as difficult as it was, became a turning point. It felt like a final thread had been untangled. A lingering shadow finally brought into the light. From that moment on, I felt a deeper sense of peace, a confidence in the foundation we were rebuilding together. Over time, we started taking on new challenges as a team. We renovated the spare room into a small home office for me, a project that was as much about problem-solving as it was about reconnecting. We spent weekends visiting friends we hadn't seen in years, building a stronger social circle and rediscovering the joy of shared experiences. We even started volunteering at a local shelter together, something that gave us a shared sense of purpose beyond ourselves. One day, while sorting through old photographs, I came across a picture of us from our wedding day. We looked so young, so full of hope and promise. I showed it to Derek and he smiled a little wistfully. We had no idea what we were getting into, did we? Not a clue, I agreed with a laugh. But I think we've done okay. Better than okay, he said, pulling me into a hug. We've been through hell and back and we're still here. That counts for something. It did. It counted for everything. The road we had traveled hadn't been easy, but it had taught us what it meant to truly fight for each other, to choose love even when it was hard. And as I stood there wrapped in his arms, I realized that the life we had now was better, richer, and more meaningful than anything we could have imagined on our wedding day. Because this love, the love we had fought so hard to protect, wasn't built on the illusion of perfection. It was built on resilience, on forgiveness, on the understanding that no one is perfect, but together we could be enough. And as we moved forward step by step, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, stronger than ever before. The years that followed became a testament to the power of second chances. Derek and I grew into a version of ourselves that was both older and wiser, shaped by the trials we had faced and the lessons we had learned. Our marriage, once fragile and fractured, became a source of strength, a partnership built on honesty, respect, and an unwavering commitment to each other. The memories of that painful time in our lives, while never fully erased, no longer held the power to hurt us. They were part of our story but not the defining chapter. We found joy in the ordinary moments. Sunday morning pancakes, late-night conversations about nothing and everything, quiet walks through the neighborhood as the seasons changed. Each of these moments became a small victory, a reminder of how far we'd come. And as the years passed, the life we built together grew richer and more fulfilling than I ever could have imagined. One day, as we sat in the backyard under the golden light of a setting sun, Derek took my hand in his touch warm and steady. You know, he said, his voice quiet but full of meaning, I still think about everything we've been through, not because it hurts, but because it reminds me how lucky I am to still have you by my side. I looked at him, my heart swelling with a love that was deeper and more enduring than the fleeting infatuation of our youth. We're both lucky, I said, because we chose each other. Again and again. In that moment I felt a profound sense of peace. Life hadn't been perfect and it never would be, but it was ours, messy, complicated, and absolutely beautiful. As we sat there watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange, I realized that love isn't about never falling down. It's about finding the strength to stand back up, to hold on, and to keep moving forward hand in hand. Our story wasn't one of fairy tale romance or effortless happiness. It was one of resilience, of forgiveness, and of choosing to believe in each other when it would have been easier to walk away. And that, I realized, was what made it so real, so worth it, so undeniably ours.